Good evening from me as well, and welcome to my hometown. I would like to call to the podium as well Mr. Alex Pantelis, who's the Chief Economic Advisor of the Greek Prime Minister. And if I may add, one of the key protagonists of the Greek competitiveness story of the last few years. So I think we're privileged to have him with us, and to start the discussion, I will give you a little bit of a background about Mr. Pantelis, Alex. He's had an illustrious career in Wall Street and the City of London, and headed his own boutique firm giving macroeconomic analysis and advice to clients around the world. An interesting anecdote I saw recently, and you can tell us, Alex, if it's true, was that when you decided to join the government, you had a lot of more than 200 clients who were advising you against it. Wanted you to stay and continue your work with them as a high-paid international advisor. Is that right?
I'm going to start, but I'm going to evade the question. I'm going to answer it.
Okay.
I want to thank, first and foremost, the organizers, GFCC, and personally also Deborah and Simeon and Simos for an amazing gathering today. And thank you to each and everyone for coming to our country and for being with us today. So I'm going to answer your question differently. I will say that the current Prime Minister and I think it was Simos who mentioned leadership. His objective always was to remain in the history books of Greece, and to do that, he has managed to bring together a very diverse team around him. He very much is a policy wonk, believes very much in evidence-based policy. And so, I was not involved in politics. So one day I received an email from the then leader of the opposition, who I obviously used to think of very highly. And he said, would you like to meet up? I read some of your reports. I liked it. And I was completely blown away. When I met him, it was my second shock, because I realized he knew a lot of the stuff that he wanted to talk about, all the economic stuff. And I would say it's to respond, to answer to your question, it's an honor and a privilege to serve my country. And it's been a great opportunity, because I'm working for someone who actually listens and reads and acts on the advice that he receives. Not always, he doesn't always agree with you, but what else could you possibly want?
If only all advisors were so lucky. But if we can go into the substance of our conversation today on Greek competitiveness, and it was mentioned before, we are coming from exiting from a decade-long deep financial crisis. And for the past 3.5 years, and even arguably a little bit before that, we saw a recovery of the Greek economy, the end of the Greek competitiveness, which just recently, I bet you felt vindicated when you saw the Economist Intelligence Unit include Greece as one of the top performers in dramatic improvement of its competitiveness position around the world by 16 positions in the ranking in its business environment. And if you could just, because you, as I said earlier, you're one of the protagonists, how did we get here? What did you get right? And what do you think it was most important for this performance?
I think this government still wants to remain humble. We rose, if I'm not mistaken, from 49 to 33, but there's a lot of work to do ahead. I would start again from the Prime Minister, and so he put together a team and studied the economic problems of Greece, and the glaring hole that you had was a investment shortfall. There was basically not enough investment going on, a gap of about 100 billion. And the recognition of that problem in itself is important, as was the secondary recognition that there's not enough savings in Greece to finance and fund that hole. So it's pretty obvious that if you want the country to grow quickly, you have to attract foreign capital. And in itself, this sort of objective that you have, let's draw foreign capital and attract it, is half the way there. Obviously, the foreign capital is not going to come just because you're telling them to come. You have to act upon it. And here I think there isn't one particular thing that the Prime Minister wanted to do. The government has passed in its 3.5 years in power, over 370 bills through Parliament. So that works out to about 2 bills a week. And the approach, I think, was very much, let's break down all the issues into their components, and then let's try to do something about everything. You won't always be successful, but you have to be systematic. There are other stats that give us a lot of pleasure. There's export share of GDP. A little known fact about this country is that exports have basically doubled as a percent of GDP. There were a lot of people who said you can't do it without a devaluation. It's simply not true. And they're now nearly 50% of GDP, a level that is above other European Union countries. FDI also reached record levels in past 12 months, and we're hopeful that, fingers crossed, that it won't drop too much now that the global outlook has deteriorated. But at the end of the day, there's not much you can do to change the way the world is going, but there is stuff you can do to change the way your own country is going, and that's what we're trying.
And of course, there are many different organizations and ways to count competitiveness internationally, and one of them is also tax competitiveness. There, Greece is still suffering from the legacies of the Greek financial crisis. The VAT in Greece is one of the highest in the European Union, and that says a lot about where we are. But again, recently...
Let me make a comment about that. So when the government came to power, the Prime Minister described the economic policy as a triangle with 3 sides. And so you had the banking system, which was in deep trouble, and I can come back to that later. You had reforms that you need to do, and I spoke of the 370 bills, but you also had fiscal mix. The fiscal mix was too much based on heavy taxation. Now, of course, the country has fiscal targets and fiscal sustainability to keep at the back of its mind, but the objective was, whenever we get fiscal room, to cut taxes. And then the question becomes, you mentioned VAT, the question becomes, okay, which taxes are you going to be cutting? And how do you prioritize? When people say, the number one request we always get from any lobby group is, please reduce taxation for us. And you always ask the question, well, okay, if I cut taxes on you, who am I going to raise them on? So from the beginning, the priority was cutting taxes on labor and on capital. Why? Labor, because there was still high unemployment, and capital, because you want to draw investment. And ultimately, in a country where you cannot devalue your currency, you need to increase the productive capacity. So to answer your question, yes, the VAT rate in Greece is too high, but maybe that's a good thing, not a bad thing, because it means that you have room to cut the dividend tax rate to 5%, the corporate income tax rate down to 22%, social security taxes have gone down by 5 points, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. So policy is a matter of
it's
priorities
and
choices, right? And even with that high VAT, actually, the tax competitiveness of Greece has also improved, according to the Tax Foundation and KEFIM, right? By 4 positions again. And you mentioned exports and the foreign direct investment. And I wonder if there are the 2 different sizes of the same coin. Are they related in your mind? Is it a result of your persistent efforts of rebuilding trust in the Greek economy? And I remember, for example, I've been getting on my email inbox occasionally, regularly, I should add, your update to international investors about all the legislative work that you've been doing. In order to sustain this good progress that we're showing, what else do you think we should be doing on the competitiveness front to improve, to further improve and stabilize and sustain this improvement? And what would be the key priorities in your mind as regards reforms going forward?
So there's a lot of work still to be done, and I'll come back to this in a moment. But I think, in general, investors require consistency and, continuous delivery. And so it's not a question of throwing fireworks and doing a firework display. You have to just continuously deliver, and if you do that, then you will be rewarded. And I think that's true of anything in life. And sometimes difficulties, the pandemic, now the Russia invasion of Ukraine, global recession, etc. Obviously, these are events that no one would wish for, but they do give you an opportunity. If you manage to navigate them, you come out of it with greater credibility. I always like to say to people who want to invest in Greece that consider that the companies that have survived and that are with us today in Greece endured a 25% decline in GDP. You tell me if a particular company can withstand a 1/4 decline in sales, which was the so those that made it through are pretty good companies, and there were a lot of good companies that didn't make it through. So to your question, there's a lot of stuff to be done. Clearly, judicial reform is one of the top of the items. The justice system in this country is still too slow, and it's sort of the #1 complaint that we get. Again, this requires a lot of small things that you need to do. There's a lot of work to be done still, obviously, on the green transition and on digital. This is an ongoing thing. The green agenda is as much an issue of implementation as it is of theory. For example, today we have 3 times as many applications for renewable projects as we have needs. And the question is, how do you cut the red tape? The problems arise in delayed licensing. How do you expedite that? And how do you prioritize as a nation where these should be? And then how do you strengthen the grid? The grid needs to be strengthened, connectedness. And then on the digital side, obviously, you have just an enormous number of projects, as diverse as, digitizing archives, digitizing the land registry, digitizing court documents, and then digital skills for young people, empowering women, for SMEs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list is endless. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Going forward, where do you see the main opportunities for growth in Greece? And I'm asking this bearing in mind that one other key aspect of competitiveness, of course, is the human factor. And we like to think in Greece and say and prove that this is one of the key competitive aspects of both the Greek economy, but also of Hellenism around the world, right? Their ability to perform both inside Greece and outside of Greece. And education is a key part in GFCC's mission as well, involving universities, engaging them in basically shaping the future. How do you see education fitting into the work going forward for Greece?
So there's 2 different questions, effectively. One is education, and the other is where to invest. I'm going to tackle them separately. On education, as I heard, Minister Kerameos will be participating, and she is an amazing minister. And here there are many different things that need to be done and were done and are being done. At a very basic level, schools in Greece, and I'm talking about elementary, middle, and high school, were too rigid, too structured, and the minister has given a lot more flexibility, has introduced lessons such as the environment, entrepreneurship, sex education, all kinds of different modules that did not exist, has abolished the idea of one textbook per subject, and has encouraged debate. At the level of university education, or let's say post-high school education, here Greece had a bizarre problem. It had too many people studying at universities and not enough people doing other stuff. And it was a conscious decision by the government, believe it or not, to restrict the number of people who entered university by about 17,000 and encourage people to also attend technical schools and develop technical skills. The shortage was pretty much there. Universities have also been given more freedom. Part of their budget is now tied to their performance, which was not the case before. They're allowed to do English language courses, which was not the case. I mean, this is a complete no-brainer. If Cyprus can have students go and study there, why not Greece? We now have, as you know, 30 American universities developing ties to the country and other university reforms. There's also continuing education of skilling and upskilling and reskilling of the labor force. And here, again, there's a question of matching the labor market needs. The country still has 12% unemployment. It had 28, it's now at 12. But there is a skills mismatch here, as there is in other countries. And so we have a committee that has been formed to study the needs of the labor market and how people should be retrained. We are very fortunate to be on the receiving end of a significant amount of funds from the European Union, some of which is being channeled towards skilling. There's some particular skills that all countries sort of seem to lack: digital skills and sustainability skills. The digital thing, most people know, the sustainability less so. The green revolution also requires people at all levels, not just at energy companies, to develop and employ people with sustainability skills. So you're absolutely right, education is very important, but it operates at many different levels. Now, where to invest? That's a very common question we get. My answer is that this government does not have an industrial policy. So we're not here to tell people where to invest. It might seem like a disappointing answer to the question, but we very much believe in free market economies, and ultimately the job of a government is to remove barriers and also to develop the public infrastructure and framework and stability that is needed for investment to flourish. Having said that, there's sort of very obvious areas. You know, if you were to change the question and say, you know, what opportunities have you tried to encourage? The digital revolution provides tremendous opportunities. Greece was one of the first countries to complete its 5G auction. And actually 1/4 of the proceeds from 5G went towards a fund that is investing in 5G services. So developing digital connectivity, optic fiber throughout the country, through the islands, very important. Because technology, what does it do? It allows us to work from remote areas or areas where we wouldn't work. We like to say, if you can work anywhere, why not work from Greece? We're blessed with beautiful weather, landscape, beaches, mountains. So we want to encourage people to look at our country also as a place to work from. It might be someone, so-called digital nomads, who only come for a few weeks. It might be yourselves coming for a conference, staying on to work from your hotel room or to rent a villa and work there for a couple of weeks. Or it might be someone, a multinational relocating. For example, JP Morgan recently announced they're going to set up a payments group in Greece. So the idea of technology as an enabler of operating from different locations. The energy transition is an obvious area of huge focus. And again, here it's more complicated than one might think. Obviously, you need to invest in a lot of renewable energy projects, and this is what the whole world is doing. We have wind, we have sun, but then you need, as I mentioned before, the grid to connect all of this. The electrification project also requires batteries and charging stations. And then, of course, we need to find ways to make our ferries electric. We need to eventually transition our shipping industry also towards alternative sources of fuel. And then you have the whole connectivity with other countries. Prior to this chat, I had a short meeting with a gentleman about an investment in an energy project in a country neighboring to Greece. This is a no-brainer. We need to all connect ourselves, and if there's one lesson from the Russia experience, is that you don't want to be too dependent on one particular supplier. So Greece is at the south of Europe. why wouldn't it be great if we can connect ourselves to North Africa and to the Gulf, where the cheapest energy will come from, and become the conduit of this energy towards the north of Europe. Then there's stuff that you never think about. For example, there's this wonderful company called Orpheum that does digital rights music management. They basically go and they've written code that goes into TikTok and YouTube and finds the sample of a Madonna song that has been, ripped off, and they allocate the rights. I mean, that's the kind of thing that a free market economy does. Katerina mentioned, let's say, the Greek spirit, and we should say that we have about 10.5 million Greeks here and about 5 million Greeks around the world, including 500,000 Greeks who left during the crisis. We want them to come back. But in general, it's a country that has a relatively well-educated middle class that can speak foreign languages and is sort of attuned to the world, let's put it that way. So it's a great place for middle or back office operations, or for groups of people that might require talent that will come from overseas. Tourism remains a big industry for Greece. It's still not just about building a hotel in a beautiful island. There's other forms of tourism. On Sunday we had yesterday, yes, we had the marathon, which 10, 15 years ago, believe it or not, was a non-event. And today it's this huge organization and has this is a form of tourism. So there's all kinds of things that you can think of.
Okay, great. We have a few minutes left, and I want to talk a little bit about the challenges ahead as well.
Yes.
So we are in an environment of rising interest rates, and Greece is still very much focused on improving, not necessarily related, but maybe it is, its credit rating as well, to improve, to raise the credit rating. How do you think, first, the interest rate increase may affect the growth prospects for Greece going forward, and the banking sector in relation to that? And what about the credit rating effort that you're making to reacquire investment grade?
So as Katerina mentioned, it's our national objective, as we like to call it, to reach investment grade next year. It will be the final stepping stone out of the crisis that engulfed the country to reach the level where, let's say, you consider a country to be quote-unquote safe. To reach that, we need to have a continued decline debt to GDP. Believe it or not, this year Greece will have the greatest drop in debt to GDP of any country in the world. We need to do more reforms, and we need to continue with the banking system. I have mentioned it, but NPEs have gone from 45% of the loan book to single digit. The interest rate shock that the whole world is going to go through is a very significant shock. We have not seen this speed of interest rate increases in many decades, and we are not prepared for it. We don't have the models. We haven't thought about it. We've thought about all kinds of things. We've become all medical experts, health experts, energy experts, but we're not interest rate experts. And if there's one thing I've always liked to urge is to think about the interest rate side. On Greece, we have government debt. We have still a high level of government debt. However, it's very peculiar. It has a very long duration, 20-year duration, and a fixed interest rate of about 1.4%. And the debt was actually overhedged against interest rate increases. So on the government debt side, we feel comfortable that we won't have any significant financing issues in the foreseeable future. On the private debt side, the tragedy of the Greek crisis, to some degree, comes as an advantage now, because we did not participate in this global credit boom that the rest of the world went through in the 2010s, and we're optimistic that this means that we still have, of course, legacy debt, legacy privacy debt, but for all intents and purposes, there's a whole generation in Greece that has never taken out a mortgage, and companies that manage to survive without access to credit. So there will be an interest rate effect from the higher interest rate, but hopefully it will be smaller than elsewhere.
Alex, thank you very much for this discussion, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the term of the government. And may I call to the podium now Ms. Maria Nicole Chu for the next panel, which will follow up to what we've been discussing on the innovation out of crisis, innovating out of crisis in finance in particular. So we look forward to